Choosing between an iPad and a normal laptop is still a popular question, especially with the introduction of iPadOS, which has brought the iPad even closer to a normal computer.
What's a computer?
The iPad can do so many normal computer things. You can plug in USB sticks, it has better multitasking, and it has mouse support now. I would say that there are generally 3 different groups of people who are still considering this question. There are students, there are those who want a device for general use, and there are those who want a device for professional use. So rather than focus on just one use case, I've divided the video into 3 sections with timestamps in the description and in a pinned comment below. And because I'm a fan of hearing the conclusion up front on YouTube videos, I'll follow that trend and say that in most cases, it just makes more sense to get a normal laptop than an iPad, especially if you're a student and you're looking to get the most amount of value for your money. So obviously not all students are exactly the same. Different courses, different needs for a computer. There's a couple of scenarios that it's easy to make your decision. So for example, if you're doing a course like graphics or physics that requires specific software, then your decision is already made for you, really. There's just some software that isn't available on the iPad. So the best thing to do is to check your degree, check your course, see if you require any specific software, and make your decision based on that. If you do, then your decision is basically already made. You'll either need a MacBook or a Windows computer, and an iPad just simply won't be able to fulfill your needs. Then there's also the use case that you think that you need an Apple Pencil. I'd say that that's probably the biggest distinguishing factor between a MacBook and an iPad is the support for Apple Pencil. So if you do something like art, and you think that an Apple Pencil will greatly improve your degree experience by being able to digitally draw on a tablet, then definitely go for an iPad. It's probably the best tablet drawing experience on the market, and a MacBook simply can't do that. But then there's the use case for a device for the student who has a more general need. So for courses like English or law or languages, where really you only need a device to research and to write essays. In this case, it would seem as though the iPad would be perfect, but I would still argue that getting a laptop is the better option. This is for a few reasons. One of them is practicality. So I'm going to give you an illustration of what I mean. What I would say is one of the biggest factors in making the decision for a university student who usually won't have like a large monitor is the screen size. iPad screens are just smaller than most laptops. Most laptops are usually 13 inches. That's just what the standard laptop screen size is. The cheapest iPad that you can buy at the moment is the 10.2 inch iPad, and the iPad Air is 10.5 inches. Now, 10.5 to 13 inches may not seem like that much of a difference, but it is. When you have a screen that small and you're trying to fit, the File Explorer, Safari, Windows, and Word documents, it passes up quite quickly and you want as much screen real estate as possible. Now this means that if you want an iPad that has the same screen size as most normal laptops, you have to go for the 12.9 inch iPad Pro, which is £1,000. It's a huge amount of money for an iPad. And the £1,000 iPad Pro has half the storage of the equivalently priced MacBook Air. So if you want to use it as your main device, you want as much storage as possible. And when talking about practicality, you really need to have a keyboard if you want to use the iPad, because the on-screen keyboard, it takes up a third to a half of the screen depending on what you're doing. And when the screen size is already smaller than most laptops, you want to use all of it and you can't have it covered up by the keyboard. Now obviously the best typing experience for the iPad is the ones that Apple sells, but they're really expensive keyboards. They start at £160. Now obviously you can buy third-party external Bluetooth keyboards, but especially as a university student, it's something else to bring around with you. It's something else you have to remember to charge, and it's just not as convenient as just having it built in like a laptop. Now this definitely reduces the versatility and practicality of the iPad compared to a normal laptop. So given that really the main thing that most university students do is research and write Word documents, it makes sense to get the device with the most usable screen, i.e. one that's larger, and the one with the best typing experience, i.e. one that isn't on an on-screen keyboard. So in that case, obviously it makes more sense to get a normal laptop. And then we move on to what I would call versatility. And this is, to a large extent, the difference between Windows and macOS compared to iPadOS. Everything on iPadOS just feels like it just takes one more step. It's one more gesture, it's one more swipe. it just seems less efficient of a device to use. So let me give you an example of what I would call a normal use case for a university student or a student of any kind. You're on Safari, you're doing some research, so you have a Word document open. Now this is pretty easy. Look, I can resize the Safari window, so now it's to the side. I can resize the Word document to make it more even. That looks okay. Now let's say I started researching this previously and I want to reference something. So I open Finder and here are all my documents. And that was pretty quick. Let's say I'm also listening to some music. Here's Spotify and that just opens. And obviously I can resize Spotify. So now it's just on top. Let's say I want to go back to Word. I can just click on Word or click on Safari. I can just switch between these really easily. It's just one click away. I want to go on the application, I click on the application, it's there. Let's compare this to how you would do a similar task on the iPad. I've got Safari open, I'm doing some research on the Apple website because why not? Now I've got a Word document open, I want to type the stuff that I've researched into this Word document. So I swipe up on the dock, I take Safari, I drag it to the side, that brings me into a split screen. Fairly easy so far. Now I remember that I want to reference something in the Files app. So I have to swipe up, and I have to get the Files app, then I have to drag it on. But if I drag it on this side, it replaces the Safari window because I can only have 2 full screen applications open at once. So I have to bring it to the middle. That opens a smaller version, that pops it onto the side. And then I've got this really small version of my Files app just on the corner. And that's fine, you know, I can look through here. But if I wanted the bigger version like I had on the Mac, I would bring it to the side, I would make it full screen, and now I've lost Safari. Safari is now a separate tab. If I click on that, it brings it up on its own, which isn't what I want. I want Safari and I want Word. Everything is just one extra step away. And there's also the small things. So for example, if you just want to plug in a USB stick and charge at the same time, which I think is a pretty normal use case, you can't do that on the iPad unless you buy a hub or you have an iPad Pro with the Magic Keyboard that costs £300. There's only one USB-C port, whereas on the MacBook Air, there's 2, and on the higher end MacBook Pros, there's 4. So you can charge and use a USB stick at the same time, and that simply is not possible on the iPad. And there's one more thing about versatility. Lots of people decide to, in the future, invest into a monitor to improve their productivity by having a larger space to move windows around. Now, if you want to plug in an iPad into a monitor, you can do that, but what it does is it doesn't extend the display like it does on a Windows computer or a Mac. It just mirrors it. So everything that's on the iPad is also on the monitor. And not only that, because the iPad isn't a normal 16:9 aspect ratio, you have these big black bars that exist on the side of the monitor. iPadOS can't even use the whole display yet. Those small things just mean that the iPad isn't as useful as a long-term machine. You can't add a monitor to your desk setup and just have an external display. It can only mirror, which really reduces its versatility and its use in the long term. Now, for general use, such as a home or work computer, an iPad can be ideal. If you know that you're only going to use your device to casually browse the internet, check emails, and watch a few YouTube videos, then sure, an iPad may be the best option for you. However, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, the same disadvantages that I mentioned for students still apply here, and I'll go over them again. The screen is still smaller on the iPad than most laptops, unless you go for the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, which is £1,000. Most laptop screens are around 13 inches, but most iPad screens are around 10.5 inches. And I know that doesn't sound like a huge difference between the two, but trust me, when you're actually using these day to day, a bigger screen makes a big difference. Also, storage is limited on the iPad compared to most equivalently priced laptops. So if you don't use much cloud storage and you want to store all your documents, videos, and photos, you may struggle to use an iPad in the long term, unless you're willing to pay quite a bit extra to get those higher storage capacities. For example, the cheapest iPad only has 32 gigabytes of storage. And I'll be honest, that really isn't enough. If, you know, when you have movies downloaded on Netflix, you have a couple games, you have your photos on there, 32 gigabytes gets filled up really quickly. Whereas if you went with a normal laptop, most of them at least start at 128 gigabytes. Most nowadays start at 256 gigabytes. And I'm sure you can find lots of Windows computers with 500 gigabytes. And 500 is going to be a far more sustainable amount of storage if you want to use this computer going forward. No one wants to be upgrading their computer every couple of years just because you didn't buy enough storage when you bought it. So for example, a MacBook Air with an education discount is around £900. And I know that that's more expensive than most iPads, but I would argue that over the long term, it has more value. This is because of its value over time. I think that you'll be able to use a laptop for more years than you'll be able to use an iPad for, especially because of the versatility of a laptop and its fully featured operating system. In the future, if you work at home, you may decide that you want to buy an external monitor, which improves your computing productivity. Or if you get interested in video editing, for example, you may want to buy an external graphics card that you can plug into a normal laptop. You can't plug in an external display to an iPad and have a fully featured experience, and you can't plug in an external GPU to an iPad, but really there'd be no point even if you could, because the desktop applications don't exist on the iPad yet. There are some very, very, very powerful applications for the iPad, but they're still not as fully featured as the ones that are available on normal computers. So these future improvements, like graphics cards and external displays, simply can't be done with an iPad. What you buy today is what you'll always have with an iPad. There aren't any improvement paths until Apple decides to make iPadOS fully featured like macOS. So obviously the iPad is still a great device, but if you have to choose between an iPad and a laptop, I would still recommend to go for the laptop, even if you're only going to use it for general tasks. So finally, there's the case for the professional, the one who has a demanding use case for their computing device. If you're one of these professionals, then it's likely that you already know if you can use an iPad or if you can't. You probably already know the limitations of the iPad and iPadOS, and if its hardware and software can be used to complete your work. So, if you're a professional, you already know if you can use an iPad or if the laptop will be better for you. Really, there isn't so much that I can actually say. If you're a professional, then you probably know more than I do about your specific use case. So make sure you do your research before, and make sure that you don't get the iPad just because of how cool and futuristic it is to get all of your work done on such a thin slab of metal and glass. So to conclude, the iPad is, without a doubt, the best tablet that you can buy on the market, and it can be used to do most normal people's tasks like browsing the internet, checking email and watching videos. But the second you start to introduce any kind of heavy workload, more in-depth multitasking, it falls apart, and a normal laptop with a fully featured operating system like macOS or Windows is definitely the way to go. The larger screen, more storage and built-in trackpad and keyboard makes it a far more versatile device, especially going forwards into the future. I'm currently working on another video about the advantages that the iPad may have over laptops. And as I start university, I'm going to try and be more consistent with YouTube because I do really enjoy content creation. So please like and subscribe for more content about technology, productivity, learning efficiency, and the law experience at the University of Durham. And please comment any topics that you'd like me to cover in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.